Welcome back. Today, I'm going to continue from where I left off last week talking about burnout. Now, last week I debunked a bunch of myths that doctors tend to have about burnout, which keeps us in a burnt out state, including things like feeling guilty about burnout and feeling like it's our fault or feeling like we have to have more resilience. Today, I'm going to talk about the sources of burnout, and it may not always be what you think. So, according to the WHO definition, it's defined as burnout is defined according to work, specifically according to work. However, in life, you can burn out from different sources. Now, work can be a source of burnout. And it can range from anything from an unreasonable workload to not being appreciated to a toxic environment. A toxic environment weighs very, very heavily on you. And just the mental energy of having to deal with working in a toxic environment can make you burn out pretty quickly. Other things include not feeling appreciated, compassion fatigue, skepticism, no support staff. I remember a few years ago, I had to work with, there was a situation in which two of us doctors had to work with one nurse. And in spite of asking for other staff, it was a long time coming. So some of these things can be causes of burnout, especially if as a physician, you can see where the deficit is needs to be corrected for everything to get better. Now, other sources of burnout apart from work include home. This is one of the reasons why, this may be one of the reasons why, actually it is one of the reasons, because I did a white paper on burnout. One of the reasons that women physicians suffer burnout a lot, because there's a workload at work, there's a workload at home. So leave work, come home and start the second shift immediately, day in, day out, night in, night out, and not even having enough time to maybe handle the tasks, and then feeling guilty for the tasks you were not able to do at home. So burnout is very real, and one can burn out from being at home. If you have a heavy workload at home, no support system, time of life. Like when I suffered burnout, I had a very young baby, and I would say technically it's not burnout because it's chronic, but if it's going on for 3-6 months, then it's chronic. You have a small baby, or you're having a couple of children who are maybe very small, you can burn out because there's just a lot of workload. So burnout can come from sources at home. In fact, there's some people who they're not burnt out at work. At work, they're perfectly fine. But the minute they get home, I had someone say to me that between the hours of 6 and 7 is one of the worst times of my life during the day. And that's because it's that rush to get dinner and get everything going in the evening for a family. So other ways that people can burn out is in volunteering. Long before we're talking about burnout because when I burnt out, that wasn't really a phrase. This was like my residency is a long time ago. That wasn't really a word that was used. But even back then, we were talking about church burnout. You can burn out as a volunteer, because what happens when you're a volunteer, you get more tasks to volunteer for because you're the one that's seen. And, people don't take I would say lazy people, I'm using that quote very loosely, in a community, in a volunteer situation, you will have people who do the work and people who don't. So I'm using the example of, say, a church. There are people who work to run things, and there are people who just come to the building and and leave. But what happens is the people who run things, who are helping, who are volunteering, end up with more tasks than is humanly possible. So they end up getting burnt out from volunteering. In addition, being a volunteer has this added, I would say added piece of making you feel guilty for saying no, because how can you say no? We need help in the soup kitchen. There are people we need to feed. There's people we need to if it's a spiritual community, there's people we need to go out and pray for. There's people we need to do like maybe street preaching for. So now there's this added guilt of having to say no, where maybe at work, in some cases, you might be able to say no, or at home, maybe you say, this is not my job description at work. At home, maybe it's like, well, you do that. No, but in church or in volunteer situations, it can be particularly tricky, where one can feel guilty about saying no to the point of becoming burnt out. Last but not the least, in business, you can burn out in business. If you are a solo business person, you can burn out very easily, right? You could burn out in business. You could, especially, in an intense phase of business growth, or in a phase where maybe you're suddenly hiring a lot of employees, or you suddenly have new clients, or you suddenly have lots of products to ship out, or something like that. Sudden intense growth in the beginning of a business where maybe you don't have access to a whole lot of capital and you have to do a lot yourself. You can burn out in business. So my next thing for you I would say, think about in your life what the sources of burnout or potential burnout are. And if you're not burnt out or anything of that nature, that's great. Let other people know that this video is available for them to watch. Share it on your social media platforms. Subscribe. Click the bell icon so you can be notified, and share it with the people in your community who may be suffering from burnout. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, after briefly touching on the sources of burnout, is creating an identity that's not burnout prone. Or if you're already burnt out, creating a new identity. Now, how you see yourself is everything. And as doctors, just generally speaking, we tend to see ourselves as the way we see ourselves makes the way we see ourselves makes us burnout prone, right? So let me talk about some of the different identities that I've seen in physicians that make one burnout prone, and the identity that one should do one's best to embody. Number one, savior with a Superman complex. You've heard of savior behavior. Some doctors have this mentality that they have to save everyone, even if they have to run through kryptonite to do it. Like, that's why I said savior with a Superman complex, right? Saving the lives of others should not cost your own, okay? Sometimes you have to go above and beyond for your patient, no doubt, right? But not everything is an emergency, and you don't have to save everyone. And indeed, you don't have the capacity as one human being in the world to save everybody. You have to decide what you're going to do, and how you're going to change your identity from a savior with a Superman complex. Oh, I have to save everyone. Remember this: saving the lives of others should not cost you your own. The next identity is the employee identity. Now, this one can be a little bit tricky because a lot of physicians, yes, are employed. But when I say the employee identity, what I mean is this: the identity that says, I do what I'm told no matter what. You are still the doctor. You are still the doctor. Sometimes we are put in positions where we have to, I would say almost compromising positions, where we feel we have to do everything, or do certain things that are, beyond the scope of maybe your license, your practice, your comfort. On those things, stand your ground. Because what's going to happen is that not only are you going to burn out, you're going to end up being a defendant when, you can't justify why you did such and such just because somebody told you to. Even the higher ups, right, can't take the place of good medicine, good practice, and good ethics. A few years ago, in a place I was working, they would try to make me see pediatric patients. I remember this particular incident where there was, I think, a 15-year-old with hypertension. And I was like, oh, well, send her to adult medicine. I'm like, no. If you have a 15-year-old with hypertension, you need to send her to pediatric endocrinology, in my opinion. I don't know what to do with a 15-year-old with hypertension. An adult, oh yeah, It's probably essential hypertension. I'll throw some hydrochlorothiazide at you, some nifedipine at you, some amlodipine at you, some enalapril at you, and call it a day. But a child, and I was like, no, I stood my ground. It's like, no, send her to a pediatric endocrinologist. I don't know whether she has some weird tumor that is causing her to have high blood pressure. Look, I'm not a pediatrician. And I stood my ground. And then it was like, no, absolutely not. But these are things that contribute to burnout, because when you feel like an employee, or you feel like all you have to do is take orders barked out at you, you feel that sense of loss of autonomy. And loss of autonomy is one of the key things in burnout. So the next identity, to that I'm going to say, before I go to the next identity, yes, you may be an employee, but you're still the doctor. You're still the most necessary part. You're still the head of the clinical team. Start to see yourself like that. You are not just any regular average Joe employee. Now, the next identity where I'm going to talk about is the fixer identity. It says, my self-worth lies in fixing everything and everyone. Okay? Now, this turns up a lot of times when physicians are at loggerheads with the systems they work in, and they're trying to fix the system. No, I'm not going to leave until this thing gets better. Realize when the system is bigger than you, and when your voice is not important in the system, and take yourself to another system that appreciates you. Your self-worth does not lie in fixing everything and everyone. You cannot fix situations and people that don't want to be fixed. Not everything is yours to fix. Next identity is the victim identity, right? You are not a victim. It's so funny. I actually tell my children that. I'm like, you're not a victim. And you're not a tree. If you don't like something, move. But you're not a victim. So that mentality is, well, I can't do anything about this. Where, our reimbursements are being cut. We're being replaced, etc., etc. No, you are the doctor. You have options. You always have options. You didn't go through medical school and lots of student loans and all the life expertise that you've collected not to have options. You have options. But it's about creating an identity that's not a victim, and creating an identity that is more than just what you mean to a hospital and a system. Your identity should come from a strong sense of self. Now, the next identity I want to talk about is that of a martyr. Right? And a martyr identity says that my self-worth lies in suffering. My self-worth lies in suffering for others. Not really. No, being sacrificial is not noble. And while we know that, yes, there are times when you have to bend over backwards to do things. Yes. But your self-worth does not lie in suffering for others. You have a life that you need to enjoy as well. And being sacrificial is not noble. When one person is sacrificial, everybody doesn't win. Only one person wins, and the sacrificial person loses. So now I've talked about all these different identities, right? But then the question remains, what identity should we embody, right? What identity should we have? What identity is going to help us? What is the burnout repellent identity, right? Here it is. The identity of a sovereign, the identity of a CEO, the identity of a person who is in charge of their own life, the identity of a CEO. Now, what does that mean, right? That means you're taking responsibility for your own life. I'm not saying taking blame for your own burnout, right? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is take responsibility for your own life, for what happens in it, for what goes on in it, for what you're going to allow, and for what you're going to disallow. And when you take that stance, you'll find that you will be surprised at all the solutions that will start to come your way when you take a stance of, you know what? I'm the CEO of my own life. I'm the sovereign. I decide what I want. I decide if I'm going to stay in this hospital system or go start my own thing. I decide how long I'm going to put up with something. I implement strategies to improve myself, and everything around me improves. So it behooves you, it behooves us as physicians to embody the most empowering identity that we can as doctors. So here it ends. I talked about different identities. I've talked about the sources of burnout, which can be work, home, in volunteering, business. I talked about different identities: a savior with a Superman complex, employee, fixer, victim, martyr. What else I missed? Victim, martyr, and last but not the least, the most empowering identity, which is to be the CEO of your own life. If you want to work with me out, there's a link. You can click the link and book a call directly on my calendar, where we will have an initial session where I will talk to you about, the next steps that you need to take, and you can decide whether or not you want to sign up for my program, my physician program called Your Optimum Life Now. Your Optimum Life Now. The reason why I call it Your Optimum Life Now is because it's time for you to live your optimum life. So most of the physicians I talk to, we're not spring chickens. I say this, I don't care who you are, but if you're over the age of 25, you're not a spring chicken. You're just not. A winter fowl, maybe, but you're not a spring chicken. Maybe this is time for you to live your optimum life now. So book a call on my calendar. I'm going to leave a link and in the notes, and book a call. It's a free call, and you can decide whether you want to work with me, and I will give you some initial steps in going forward. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm doing this on both YouTube and my podcast. So, I'm watching. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. Listening to it on my podcast, thank you so very much for listening. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.